Okay, for our math warm-up today, we are going to be doing some decimal dictation and rounding. So this is going to require you to pause your video and then start again and pause your video a little bit back and forth. So if you would, stay with me, stay tuned, stay listening, and let's see what we can do here. So first of all, I want you to write the decimal 5 7/10. Pause your video. 5 7/10 should be written like so. Now what I would like you to do is round that decimal to the nearest whole number. Pause your video. You should have rounded to 6. Okay, here's your next one. Write the decimal 108 12/100ths. 108 12/100ths. Pause your video. You should have written 108 12/100ths. And now what I would like for you to do is round that decimal to the nearest tenth. To the nearest tenth. Go ahead and pause your video if you need to. You should have made that 108 1/10 would be the nearest tenth. Okay, let's take a look. Let's do a third one. Write the decimal 753 thousandths. 753 thousandths. Pause your video. You should have written 0.753. And now what I'd like you to do is round that decimal to the nearest hundredth. Round that decimal to the nearest hundredth. Pause your video. Okay, so we would have 0.75. How'd you do? Great job. For our math message today, we have a word problem. So let's take a look to see what we are doing. 4 siblings bought their parents an anniversary gift that cost $84.12, including tax. If they split the cost equally, how much did each sibling pay? So the first thing that I want you to do is write a number model to go with that word problem. Pause your video and do that now, please. Okay, so let's take a look at the number model with our unknown, and hopefully you wrote the same thing. So I've got $84.12 divided by 4, because there's 4 siblings, equals Y. Now, there's several different strategies that we could probably use to work this problem out. Some of you might be thinking about dollar bills and maybe trying to break the $84.12 apart somehow and dividing each part possibly by 4. The fact that it has a decimal point in it, maybe you're thinking about when we multiplied decimals, how we turned them into whole numbers, took the decimal points out. So some of you might be thinking along that line. So either one of those ways would work out. We could change that all to pennies, right? So we could pretend that that decimal point's not there, and we could divide 8,412 pennies by 4 and then figure out how many dollars that would be in the end. So depending on what route you took would determine your strategy, of course. So that leads us to what are we going to be doing for our lesson today, right? you're going to work out several division problems with decimals and whole numbers, very similar to this problem that we're doing in our math message. So let me go ahead and divide that out, and we can talk about what would our final answer be. And I should say you should pause your video and see if you can figure it out, and come on back and see if you get it right. Okay, so what I went ahead and did was took the $84.12 and I just made it a whole number, so we can pretend that it's pennies if that's what you want to do. Divided by 4. I worked out the problem. Notice when I got down here, I had 1 when I brought that 1 down and I couldn't divide. So just as a reminder, I had to put a 0 up here and then bring down that second number so that I had 12. So we ended up with 2,103 pennies, and then if we turn that into dollars and cents, it would be $21.03 each. Did you get the same answer? Our lesson, of course, is called Division of Decimals by Whole Numbers. The reason we're doing this lesson today is because, as you saw from the math message, we have real world situations where we need to be able to do these kinds of things. So we learned how to multiply decimals. Now we're going to learn how to divide them. So that would be the other reason. And how we're going to go about that is we're going to use our knowledge and skill from multiplying decimals and apply that to dividing decimals. So we will use some similar strategies. I have a couple of examples here today, and we're going to use the steps that I have here at the top to calculate the answer to each one of these problems. So our first step, one of the most important one, is to make an estimate. The second step is to divide as if the dividend were a whole number. And the third step is to use the estimate to place the decimals. So again, this is very similar to multiplying decimals. So let's get started. Our first problem is 6 42/100 divided by 3 equals P. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to make an estimate. We want to think about what could we do here for an estimate. And I'm just going to make it something fairly simple that I can do in my head and I know will divide out evenly. So I'm going to think, okay, 6 divided by 3 equals 3. This is going to be my estimate. Now I'm going to take the 6 42/100 and I'm going to pretend that that decimal point does not exist for right now. And I'm going to divide that number by 3. Okay, so now I've divided the problem. 642 divided by 3 is 214 after I've worked it all out. So check your division if you were trying to do it along with me. And now what do? Well, we look back at our estimate. Our estimate was 3. And I look at this number 214. So I need to think about, okay, what would make sense for decimal placement? It would make sense to place my decimal here, so that my final answer would be 2 14/100. Let's take a look at the next problem. We have 8 44/100 divided by 3 equals X. So the first thing that we need to do is make an estimate. So I'm going to make that, we could do 8 divided by 3, but that's not going to come out evenly. We could do 6 divided by 3. That's making that a little bit smaller. Could we do 10 divided by 5? Let's do that route. Okay, gives me an estimate of 2. So then again, we're going to set up the problem and pretend that it doesn't have a decimal. So we'll do 844 divided by 3. So go ahead and pause your video and work that out. Okay, so for this particular problem, when we work this out, and you can check my math here as you're looking, you should have gotten an answer of 281, and then we had a remainder of 1. I reported that as a fraction because if we had done that on a calculator, it would have given us a decimal for our answer. So on a calculator, it would have given us 281,333, and it might repeat a little bit because it's 1/3. So we have all of these digits. We have to think about, okay, now where do I put my decimal point? I go back to my estimate was 2 right here. So look at all these digits. I'm going to place my decimal point between my 2 and my 8 because that makes the most sense. Okay, so we're going to take our decimal knowledge now and apply it to some real-world problems, some word problems. So let's take a look at the example that I have here for you to practice. Brandy bought 1 27/100 pounds of mixed nuts. She divided the nuts equally into 4 bags. How many pounds of nuts are in each bag? So the first thing that I want you to do is, of course, write a number model with an unknown. So go ahead and pause your video and then go ahead and see if you can work out the problem. Okay, so let's take a look. I wrote the equation 1 27/100 divided by 4 equals x. So there is my number model with my unknown. I wrote an estimate of 1 divided by 4 equals 1/4. So this tells me that my answer is going to be less than 1. When I worked the problem out over here, I took out the decimal point. So I had 127 divided by 4. I worked that out, ended up with a remainder of 3. So I had 31 3/4 as I reported as a fraction. You don't have to report it as a fraction. You could have said 31 remainder 3, which is fine. But I want you to think about, is that answer closer to 31 or 32? So it is closer to 32 because 3/4 is past the half mark. So we would say that 127 divided by 4, where I'm going to show you a new symbol, right? It's going to be an equal sign with wiggly lines. So that means approximately 32. Okay, and the reason I say that is because we're going to want to pick the closest number so that when we decide how are we going to write that as a decimal, where does my decimal point go, if my answer were approximately 32, but I don't have a decimal point yet, and my estimate up here was 1/4, I know it's going to be less than 1, so that means my decimal point is going to go here, because my answer has to be less than 1. So we could rewrite that as 0 and 32/100. Okay, lots of information today. Let's go ahead and summarize what has happened. We know now that estimates are an essential step when dividing decimals, just like when we multiply them. We also learned that we can use similar strategy with dividing decimals as we do with multiplying them. Let's treat them like whole numbers and then place the decimal point, which is exactly what we did today. Are you ready? Let's go get some practice. Until next time.